Hey, Jay.
What's up, M.R?
Well, it's Pride Month, and I don't know about you, but I can't think of anything I enjoy more during Pride Month than chatting with and learning from queer elders, the folks who launched our community from scratch.
I couldn't have said that any better myself.
But before we dive in, we probably want to introduce ourselves and the show a little bit, right?
Absolutely not. But since you insist, I shall oblige. With my moon in Leo, obviously I'll go first.
But wait, Jay, my sun's in Leo. You know this, my Aquarian friend.
Well, this just got awkward. Anyways, hi everyone, I'm Jae, one of your co-hosts for this new podcast from the Outwords Archive called The Golden Queers. I'm from LA. Besides being a podcaster, I'm also a social media strategist, and I'm really excited to be here chatting with elder queers.
And I'm M.R, your other co-host. I'm based in Oakland and I'm a bilingual audio storyteller, producer, and metal enthusiast. Think of us as Tweedledee and Tweedledum, except we're queer and we love to interview our queer elders to learn from them and also share a bit about how we see the world.
Heck yeah, we do. And so this leads us into what we're doing here on this show.
In honor of Pride Month, the Outwords Archive, which is an LA-based project to interview, preserve, and share the stories of LGBTQ+ elders, has collaborated with the California State Library to launch an intergenerational queer storytelling project.
On each episode, we'll sit down and chat with a queer elder to learn about their lived experiences that shape our lives today, all the while sharing their involvement with local California activism.
To get us started today, we'll sit down with Yoseñio V, a San Francisco-based Afro-Latinx trans activist, artist, and health educator.
Yoseñio's story starts right now.
So I was born in 1959, and I was born in Newport, Rhode Island. I spent 18 years of my life on that island, and I absolutely adored the island. That does not mean that I loved how I grew up. How I grew up was one of a very few dark-skinned people who went to school and was oftentimes, in a variety of ways, told that I was less than. I did not have the best home life, which only added to this sense that I was different. And when I was 3, that's when I knew that I was trans. When I was 13, still back in Rhode Island, I did a little political or activist action with the camp that I was participating in, and that allowed me to become drunk with power. The story is that I watched a fellow camper being treated poorly. I spoke to the staff. Nothing was changing. Nothing was getting better. I spoke to the management. Again, nothing was changing. So I wrote a letter to the governor and I said, someone who is developmentally delayed is being treated poorly, and I don't think that's right. I actually got a letter from the governor, and then suddenly there was an investigation, and suddenly people were gone and new people were in. And that really did make me feel wonderful that I actually stood up and did something rather than just complain. But basically, I was smitten with the idea of being an activist, of standing up and making a difference.
This is so beautiful, and I'm loving that as a 13-year-old, you were already advocating for folks because that's a young age. I mean, you were already aware that you didn't want to, as you said, just complain. Mm-hmm. You wanted to take action, and you did. It makes so much sense that that moment was pivotal to you because starting to advocate at such a young age and enjoying that feeling you're describing of being drunk with power would totally set the course for wanting to continue to be an advocate. And it makes me wonder about self-advocacy because you mentioned that you knew from 3 years old that you were trans. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you were able to invoke some of that advocacy that you were doing on behalf of the fellow camper for yourself within your family and community, or how this manifested itself for you.
It took 30 years from being 3 to tell my family. But I knew at 3 because if I was at a store or at the park or anywhere, anytime anyone said, "Oh, look at that cute little boy," I would light up. My heart would jump. And the first thought in my head was, "Oh my God, you see me. Thank you, thank you." Everybody else around me like, no, that's a girl, that's a girl. It's like, yeah, not really. But I didn't have language. I knew something was different, but I did not have the precise language or even rudimentary language that I could utilize to say, this is who I am. And I didn't actually come out to anyone until high school. And when I did that, it was very opaque, so that if there was any kind of misunderstanding, I could say, oh, no, you misunderstood what I was saying. But I don't believe there was any kind of misunderstanding because the response was very poor. It was very rude and cruel. And that was my first taste of you don't ever say anything to anyone.
So at 33 years old, you were living in California, and what started to change? Like, what started making being trans feel possible?
That was in 1993. And what made it more possible is that I had been doing my activist work. Every topic that I focused on, eventually I moved to making something trans specific. If I was never going to come out, I was going to at least make sure that everybody else could have access to the services that they needed and that they could access them without concern about how they were going to be treated. But at 33, a friend of mine said, I know a group that you should go to, which was called FTM International. And it was a support group for trans men. I walked into a meeting and I thought, this is me. So, of course, I burst into tears. And then I said, all right, man up, because, I'm still trying to fight all the patriarchy and all of the false masculinity, but also trying to embrace it so people can see me. So I got into the group. I met somebody who was so kind and wonderful to me when I was immediately being told that, yeah, we can talk about you being a guy, but really we don't have time for all that stuff about being Black and what that was like. And we're not here about race. We're just here about gender. And that put me off. But again, when you have never met anyone who looked like you, sounded like you, thought like you, felt like you, you'll take whatever you can get of that. So I took it. I stayed with that group. I supported that group because I needed the validation. I ended up becoming part of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission's LGBT Advisory Committee. There's an opportunity for me to have an input on what was happening for trans people in San Francisco and by extension, the Bay Area. All of those opportunities helped me to feel more comfortable with coming out. And actually the real reason that I came out to my family finally was because I was involved with someone and I wanted to have her be part of our family reunion. And I did not want to say, oh, this is my former college roommate, or this is a friend, or, I didn't want to lie. I was tired of lying. So I just said, this is my partner. And the same way that you treat other partners and boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives is how I want you to treat this person.
I'm wondering where that cohesion was in terms of you becoming more comfortable with yourself, and also throughout the decades, having lived through a time in which things were becoming easier and easier to be queer and easier to be trans, meaning taking us up to the present, because in so many ways I feel like we're more in that moment than ever before, and there's a lot of privilege and a lot to feel grateful for within that. Mm-hmm. But I'm also curious to go back to what you were talking about in your support group about how that person was sort of saying, we're not talking about race. We're just here to talk about the fact that we're trans guys, and that's that. Right. Tell me more about that, and maybe also when you started to talk more about the intersection of race and transness in this community.
I would say 3 or 4 years before I got enough courage to say, no, I'm not just going to talk about gender. I'm not just going to talk about being a trans guy and how short my hair needs to be and what kind of clothes I need to wear to camouflage or to highlight certain parts of my body. Those are all important, but that's not the only thing I can think about. I still have to think about when I go to a store, how much am I going to be followed? I still have to think about when I go to pay for something, are there going to be 4 or 5 people around me assuming I don't have the money and I'm trying to steal something? I still have to think about people who look at me and immediately clutch their purses or grab their wallets or whatever it is, because I'm a threat. I was a threat when I was viewed as a woman. And I'm even more of a threat now that I'm viewed as male. And I didn't have my support group that was supposed to be there to support me, didn't make very much room for that to happen. And I did want to say about San Francisco and the Bay Area, I've never thought of San Francisco as the place to be and that you're safe here and everybody's going to accept you and life is going to be great. It's never been that way for me because I've never been able to take off my skin. And that's the first thing that people see. When I walk into a room, I am bringing in the trans man, but I'm also bringing in the Black man, and I'm bringing in the Latino man, and I'm bringing in the disabled man, and I'm bringing in the survivor man. I'm bringing in all those parts of me. And I refuse to have people tell me, oh, we only want 2 of those. You're going to have to leave the rest of that in the hallway. No, all of me is what you're going to get because all of me is what I need to be able to express in order to stay alive. It's so easy to put that veneer on that San Francisco is so welcoming. And it is if you got money, and it is if you have connections. But if you're a poor Black kid who doesn't know anybody, who isn't clear on what's right and wrong and how to do this and how to do the other, it was hell. My first few years here were hell. It is a place where I feel safer than in other places. But a big part of that is because I helped create laws and ordinances and guidances that said you will not treat trans people as less than or differently. Most of that came through my work with the LGBT Advisory Committee to the Human Rights Commission. Being on that committee exposed me to a lot of the injustices that were happening in San Francisco. And I got, again, drunk with power. I knew I had some sway. I knew I could say some things, I could do some things, and it would make a positive change. And we had a series of hearings, late 90s, early 20s, 2000s, I guess I should say. And because of that, we had this San Francisco Transgender Protocol Implementation Task Force. We created a protocol on how trans people should be treated. And then the implementation task force was there to actually do the implementing, to go out and train employers, train employees, talk to providers, help people to understand the days of dismissing us or treating us as if we didn't exist or we didn't matter were over. We became, San Francisco, when I say we became a template for other cities and other states and eventually other countries. We were able to make some very substantial changes. It caused a lot of angst for many of us because we had to sit and listen to people telling us how awful we were and how we were going to, of course, molest every child on the planet and how we were going to confuse everyone. And especially in regards to the insurance changes that we helped to make. Oh, you're going to make San Francisco retired city employees have to eat dog food and cat food because we have to pay for all of you freaks who want to have surgery. They wanted us to put down, basically it's assurances that the funding would not wither away because however many people, in their estimation, the thousands and thousands of trans people who were living in San Francisco at that time were all going to become city employees and we're all going to want all the surgeries that we could possibly have, and probably some we didn't even need just because we wanted to. But it was fighting against those kind of small minds that, number one, took me back to when I was a kid and I had those small minds, and then two, to how hard it is to change someone's opinion and how you have to be willing to slog through all of that for the very long haul. You can start doing some work in 1993, but it might not come to fruition until 2005. 2010, 2015. But you stay with it because you know that the goal is worthy. And for me, the goal was that I got to live a life where I felt a little more safe. And I could then help others to feel a little more safe. But because we did that, we have the laws we have now. We have the ordinances. We have the guidelines. We have nonprofits and for-profits who recognize that their funding can be in jeopardy if they discriminate against trans people. It was well worth it. It was just a lot of work, and there were many, many nights of why am I doing this? Why am I letting people tell me that I'm horrible, that I'm disgusting, that I'm evil, that I need to repent, and on and on and on? Well, because I know what I went through, and I know that I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through.
It's really amazing to hear about this history. I'm so appreciative and just like really, really excited to be hearing about your contributions. I'm also curious to hear about something that's a source of joy for you, which we talked a bit about it when we were originally speaking, which is your Barbershop quartet. Tell me more about it.
The quartet came about because I like to sing. And it was also maybe an offshoot of being in the Transcendence Gospel Choir, which was the first trans gospel choir, we believe, in the world. And it was a way to do ministry while being trans. I was allowed to go into churches and sing with the choirs of the church. And suddenly it was not, oh, you're trans, oh, you're Black, oh, you're this, oh, you're that. It was, oh, you sing and you have a relationship with God. And so do we. And so let's sing together. And once that happened, it became easier for us to be seen as humans. Once we get seen as humans, we're in, and we can start talking to people and explaining to them who we are, what we're about, and what they have to worry about and what they do not have to worry about. The Barbershop Quartet came because I had left the gospel choir, but I still wanted to sing. We could bring joy to people. We could bring joy to ourselves. The highlight of being in that quartet was being able to sing at a fundraiser for a friend of mine who had cancer and changing some lyrics in various songs that people associate with barbershop quartets, like Mr. Sandman. We changed it to Mr. Transman. And we sang a lot about our joys, our benefits, our love. I remembered, actually, I think we were at Jae Singh, and we sang Good Night, Sweetheart. And it had happened, of course, there had been some trans murders, and this was part of the Trans Day of Remembrance. And we sang Good Night, Sweetheart. And it was so poignant. It's making me tear up now. It was so poignant because people understood the significance of what we were singing. And they understood how you could take those words and twist them around to have more value in your own personal life. We were pretty much like a service organization, but it was also a service to ourselves. We were all healing in our own ways by being in that quartet, being able to sing about fun things and to change lyrics so they were suggestive and appealing, but also to once again get the point across that, you know, we're here and we are people and we deserve respect and dignity no matter what we look like or sound like or where we came from or how many people are in our family and if we even have family and all of that. We deserve as much as anyone else deserves.
Yeah, that really resonates for me in the storytelling work that I do because I feel like there's a real narrative shift occurring about what stories are being told and by who. And as a storyteller, as a producer, I'm not participating in activism in the same way, but if I'm out in the world interviewing activists, getting their stories out, I feel like that's my role in the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And reflecting on this makes me think about the ecosystem between the different generations of queer folks who have collaborated and organized so that we may exist, like what we're doing here today. Right. I've always had friends and community of all ages, and I think that was something that my grandma taught me, and I'm just so grateful to her for setting that path for me. And so I'm wondering if you have any questions for me, or if you'd want to talk about what you think about intergenerational queer community.
I want to be a role model for young trans people. I want them to understand, yes, you're going to have your own journey that you're going to go through, and it might be nothing like what I experienced or continue to experience, but it doesn't make it less valid. You know, you might not have had some of the challenges that I had, but you had your own, and they need to be honored. And I want to know about them because I want to know that we've actually made some changes rather than you continue to have to go through the same struggles that people my age went through. And I continue to go through the same struggles that people who were older than me went through. I would like to know that somehow I was able to interrupt that process. Otherwise, why call myself an activist? Otherwise, why call myself a trans man if I'm not going to be also committed to making changes for others? I want to do that, and I want to learn from people who have come after me. I want to know, what was it like for you? How were you able to navigate the world? What can an old head like me continue to do to support you? I didn't have to do these things, or I don't have to worry about the whole notion of, do I have 3 items of clothing of the gender or of the sex at which I was assigned at birth? Do I have 3 items of that clothing on? Because if I don't, I could be arrested. I don't want anybody who's younger than me to ever have to worry about something like that. And I take that as a mark of progress, that while that may be true still in some small towns in the country, it's not the overarching or customary thing that people have to worry about anymore. I look with joy and pride at the fact that there are many organizations still with their own issues around racism and classism and sexism. But there are organizations that are devoted to caring for us, for helping us to grow and thrive. That didn't really exist when I was growing up, and for a long time didn't exist as I was a young adult. There have been some substantive changes, but there's still so much more to do. And I really want to know from younger people, what can I do to help?
For me, I didn't have anybody to look to until I got to college, and really that was a very important moment. And I was extremely fortunate to attend a college where there were people that were queer and trans, and that I could form my own queer community for the first time in my life, which was, I was just ecstatic. But again, none of that would exist without the work that you've done and the work that other folks like you have been doing. Mm-hmm. And yet still, folks don't know what pronouns to use or how to celebrate queer and trans folks.
You see me, and yet there are still people who will look at me with this beard and the voice and everything, and still, miss, sir, ma'am, sir. And I'm like, you know what? You're going to stay in that discomfort because I'm not going to save you.
Right, exactly.
You need to figure it out. So that's on you. I spent so much of my life trying to accommodate other people and making sure they didn't feel bad about my gender expression. And now I need to focus on me. So that means if you're having a difficult time, then you're going to be there until you open your mouth and say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure which word to use for you. And then I can talk to you. I'm all right, but you're not going to make me do it.
I wanted to pause here and just really stand in solidarity with what Yoseñio said. At a certain point, and I think you can speak more truth to this than I can, M.R., but I think to a certain point, you have to stop wanting or needing others' acceptances.
You're so freaking right. We as queer folks are so often explicitly or implicitly asked to change ourselves so as to not make the dominant cis-het world uncomfortable. I remember one time before my first day at a new job, I felt this pressure, honestly from myself, to dress a certain way to tone down my queerness because I wasn't sure the kind of environment I was stepping into, which, as it turns out, was a very queer one and I had nothing to worry about. But that was the best case scenario, right? So I love that Yoseñio was able to reach this moment of celebrating himself before wanting to appease others. That takes a whole lot of courage, and beyond courage, self-love, and being in celebration of oneself. And it makes me wonder the ways in which this has shown up for you in your life, Jae.
Okay, well, you see, for me, it was rather the opposite. I always felt as if I was kind of always lacking in this quote-unquote queerness. As something we've definitely discussed off mic, M.R, I've expressed how in certain queer spaces and groups, I was often told I didn't look, speak, act, or dress queer enough. So for me, I was always looking for the next thing, outfit, term that would make me appear more bi or queer to literally the queer community. So while you were trying to tone it down, I was trying to amp up my queer. You know what I'm saying? I remember being told, well, you don't look bi. Or, I would have never guessed you're bi just by looking at you. Like, excuse me? I don't look bi? I honestly don't even know what it means to look bi. But then there came a glorious moment where I just stopped caring about people's expectations. I mean, we talk about expectations, but those same expectations also arise in some aspects within our very own community.
Oof, I have like smoke coming out of my ears right now, and you're about to see my full-blown Leo protectiveness coming out, but like, I hate that you had to go through that. It's bananas to me that we as queer folks create binaries or gatekeep within the very binaries we're dismantling and rupturing. And I hate to say that it happens to me too.
No, really? But how so?
Well, as you know, I have super long hair, and up until recently, I didn't really feel fully seen by myself and by some other queer and trans folks because there wasn't this understanding or acceptance that having long hair can be androgynous as all heck and liberating too. Something that I'm only recently coming to terms with myself. And don't get me wrong, some days I wish I could like press a button on my forehead and have a shaved head, but then the next day have my long hair to headbang with at the metal show. But it just goes to show that we're living in a moment where I feel hopeful that folks are more and more open to celebrating every single one of us in the dynamic ways that we exist. And this goes deeper than hair, obviously, because it does affect how we're able to be open and in celebration of ourselves.
Tell me why I can actively, vividly imagine that image of you like beep boop, pressing a button and your hair like magically reappearing to headbang. But I'm super grateful that Yoseñio mentioned this because it's definitely imperative to our mental health as queer folks to come to this acceptance.
Yes, I love what you're saying. And let's keep rolling that tape.
When you are uncomfortable, you have to think of different ways to get back to your comfort level. Like, oh, maybe I don't have to discriminate against that person because I don't understand them. Maybe I don't have to say something. Maybe I don't have to engage in violence. So that's my goal. I really do want to make people uncomfortable, and with the hope that they will expand the way they're thinking and change their behavior.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's kind of one of the best things about being alive and why, again, like I love the work that I get to do because I talk to people who I otherwise might not encounter. Recently, I was facilitating a recording with two guys in rural Oklahoma, and one of them was a libertarian and the other one was a very right-wing Republican. And these guys were very interested in connecting with me as the producer. They wanted to ask me questions, and I was really interested in connecting with them as well, both in and out of the recording space. And one of them, the right-wing guy, he was a big jokester, and he loved trying to get a rise out of me. He was very open during the recording, and he did not hold back. So after we wrapped the recording, he asked me if someone was going to come spank him because of what he had said. And I just started to crack up. I mean, like, what other reaction was I going to have?
Yeah.
And it was very genuine because when have I been asked this question before? But he asked it in a way that I feel like folks sort of speak in this particular way when they're testing you to see if you're going to have a bad reaction or if what they've said is going to have made you uncomfortable. But instead, I turned it back on him and I told him that, yeah, like it could be arranged if he wanted to choose someone in particular to come and spank him. And he just totally lost it because I didn't give in to what, of course, was discomfort in some ways with what he said, because let's be real. Hearing an old white man talk about spanking is not really what I want to hear. And I was actually able to subvert a feeling of someone trying to make me feel uncomfortable for being different than them and not give in to those feelings. And I feel like I try to actively be in spaces where I'm not in an echo chamber because that's not an accurate representation of life outside of my chosen family and community.
Right.
So I love those moments where we connect with folks who we might not usually connect with because I don't think we naturally choose to do that.
Right.
And so for me, to bring it full circle to my work, I'm always thinking, how can I make content accessible to folks who wouldn't necessarily listen to this? How can I get them to care about this? And a lot of that care is bringing the human and the humanity to every story. I'm still working out how we get to that place of mutual understanding, but I'm working on it, and that's my work.
And that's what's so important and significant, is that you are working on it, that you do put yourself in those places where you are uncomfortable and you find a way to get back to your homeostasis.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And as we start to wind down our conversation today, I'm curious what message you might want to leave for future generations of trans folks and queer folks, and also, what would you want to tell your younger self today if you could?
I would want to say to the youth, I'm here to help. And I want to help because nobody was there for me. And I don't want you to have to go through that. And I don't care what age you are. If you know yourself, if you have questions about yourself and you want someone older to speak with, I want to be available for that. Number one, because it will help to heal me. And then number two, hopefully it will help to heal whoever I'm speaking with. What I would have said to my younger self is, hey, even though it's going to be hard, it's going to be worth it. Because you are going to have moments where you are filled with pride and joy for yourself. Because you put together some words, you strung them together in such a way that it touched someone's heart, that it maybe made someone think, yeah, maybe I'll wait one more day to kill myself. And then maybe that next day I'll wait another day. Your future is bright, and you got to stay around to make that happen and to give to others. So stick around and make that happen, and then bask in your glory, because you've done a lot. You've made a difference in a lot of people's worlds already, and you're going to make so much more difference as you get older and have more power and agency. So yes, it's hard, but you're going to be okay. And you are going to be the one that people turn to. And all of this will have been worth it for that one moment of, Yoseño, can you help me with, can I talk to you? Do you know about? It's all worth it to me.
Wow. Just wow, MR. I remember listening in on this conversation and being in so much awe of Yoseño's resilience.
Yes, big ditto. I feel incredibly humbled to be living in the very city in which, as a direct result of Yoseño's work and activism, trans folks have protections and stewards such as Yoseño keeping us safe.
Tune in next time for another episode of The Golden Queers from the Outwords Archive. We'll be back soon!
The Golden Queers is produced, hosted, and edited by Jae Singh and M.R. Raquel, with music provided by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. Find The Golden Queers online at thegoldenqueers.org. Executive producers for the Outwords Archive are Jack MacCarthy and Bliss, and Outwords' executive director is Mason Funk. Outwords captures, preserves, and shares the stories of LGBTQ+ elders to build community and catalyze social change. More info at theoutwordsarchive.org. That's Outwords, WORDS. The Golden Queers is funded by a generous grant from the California State Library's Oral History Project. Special thanks to this week's storyteller, Yoseño Lewis. Additional thanks to Lenore Goldfarb and Julie Rowley.